At the beginning of the 16th century, on the southern bank of the river Kongo, a determined effort was made, with Portuguese aid, to Europeanize the African kingdom of Bukongo. Earlier, in the 1490s, in the reign of Nzinga Nkulu, Portuguese missionaries and traders began to arrive among the Bukongo. Favorably impressed with these foreigners, the next Mani Kongo of the Bukongo, Nzinga Mvemba, son of Nzinga Nkulu, decided to Europeanize his kingdom. He abandoned his ancestral superstitions and embraced Christianity. Upon being baptized, he dropped his African names and titles. Thenceforth, he would be known as Dom Afonso I, King of the Congo and Lord of the Ambundos. He learned to read and write Portuguese. He Europeanized his court in etiquette and dress. With help from Portuguese women who taught Portuguese domestic arts to the ladies of his court, Afonso soon learned to eat like a European and sleep like a Christian. He sent some of his sons and relatives and other noble youths to study in Portugal and Rome. One of these, Dom Henrique, served as Bishop of Utica, a city on the Mediterranean coast of what today is Tunisia. He returned in 1521, after an absence of 13 years, to serve as Bishop of Bukongo. Afonso built schools and churches. His capital, Mbanza Kongo, Europeanized and renamed São Salvador, was so full of churches it was nicknamed Ikongo dia Ngungo, or the City of Church Bells. All through his long reign, 1506 to 1543, this Europeanizing African prince sent embassies to Portugal and to the Pope in Rome, seeking from his brother Christian princes economic, technical, and religious assistance for his efforts to Europeanize his land and people. His long and often despairing effort got him some help, little of which was of the kind he wanted. Afonso wanted aid for autonomous development. His Portuguese helpers wanted slaves. So, while he received a trickle of books, masons, printers, blacksmiths, and assorted artisans, he got a disastrous flood of Portuguese slavers. By 1526, in order to save his society and his throne, Afonso determined to stop the trade in slaves. He wrote to John III of Portugal complaining that Portuguese merchants daily seize our subjects, sons of the land and sons of our noblemen and vassals and our relatives. They grab them and cause them to be sold. And so great, sir, is their corruption and licentiousness that our country is being utterly depopulated. We need from your kingdoms no other than priests and people to teach in schools, and no other goods but wine and flour for the holy sacrament. That is why we beg of your highness to help and assist us in this matter, commanding the factors that they should send here neither merchants nor wares, because it is our will that in these kingdoms of Congo there should not be any trade in slaves nor market for slaves. But Afonso's repeated complaints were to no avail. The Brazilian plantations were growing and clamoring for slaves. Slaves, slaves, and more slaves. Afonso's royal will was disregarded. Another of Afonso's letters to John III complains that some of the noble youths he sent off to Portugal to learn the service of God never came back. They were seized on the island of São Tomé by Portuguese merchants, and nothing was ever again heard of them. Portuguese slaving priests, traders, and adventurers also undermined Afonso's royal monopoly of Bukongo's foreign trade. Before long, many of Afonso's Europeanized vassals, greedy for European wares and unable to get them except in exchange for slaves, disregarded their king's injunctions and, indifferent to the social consequences of slave raiding, plunged into the traffic in slaves. Raids and revolts, sometimes fomented by Portuguese who wanted to stimulate the supply of slaves, took their toll of Bukongo's peace. An era of disorders, stagnant peace, and fitful revivals began. The social decay proved irreversible. More than a century after Afonso's death, a Portuguese expedition sacked the ravaged kingdom and overthrew the tattered power of Afonso's descendants. In 1665, when the reigning Mani Kongo denied the Portuguese permission to prospect for gold and copper in his kingdom and raised an army to enforce his refusal, there was full-scale war. Both the Black Bakongo and the White Portuguese went to battle waving the banner of the cross. The Bakongo were summoned to patriotic battle by their king, to defend our lands, wares, children, women, and our own lives and freedoms, which the Portuguese nation wants to conquer and dominate. But the battle was a disaster for the Bakongo. Their army was smashed, their Mani Kongo was killed, their independence was extinguished. Thereafter, though nominally sovereign during 2 more centuries of decay, they were vassals of the Portuguese, sending as tribute slaves who were exported overseas to toil on Portuguese plantations in Brazil. Let us bear the Bakongo precedent in mind as we examine the present plunder of Africa through the mechanisms of westernizing aid. As we observe the brain drain and the resumption of the brawn drain exemplified by the smuggling of truckloads of African laborers through Italy to toil in the factories of France, as we observe the complicity of westernizing Africans in the plunder of Africa's resources, let us ask, what is there to prevent a recurrence of the Bakongo disaster? What measures must we take to avoid it?